Dear friends of the Estoril Political Forum, first of all, my apologies. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you today in Estoril, as it was my intention. I have an institutional obligation to be in Brussels, in the headquarters of the European Commission in the Bellemont. There is a meeting of the current and the former presidents of the European Commission to celebrate the European Commission and European Union history. But I'm happy to have the opportunity to be with you through this video message and to share my thoughts on this very important topic of European Union-NATO relations. A special word of thanks to Professor João Carlos Espada, as Director of the Instituto de Estudos Políticos, and Rita Seara Brito, as Director of the Estoril Political Forum, for their understanding. Also, my apologies to my very good friends, Ambassador António Monteiro and Professor Hartmut Meyer. They are the host and the chair of this session. And my colleagues of panel, Angelino Alfano, Kurt Volker, Willem Hofmeister. I hope they understand the reasons why I cannot be with you today. European Union-NATO relations is in fact a very important topic in the current situation. European Union and NATO, as you know, are very different organizations in terms of their competences, in terms of their goals, but they share many values and they are largely overlapping organizations. Indeed, most members of NATO are members of the European Union, and most members of the European Union are members of NATO. Around 95% of the European Union citizens are living in a NATO country. We should not forget that when we discuss this issue of NATO-European Union relations. There is, as I said, a broad convergence of values, even if the historic developments of these organizations are quite different. And as organizations, they pursue different goals. NATO is basically a military alliance, even if it's not only a military alliance, but that's the main purpose of NATO as an organization. The European Union is a case of regional integration based on economic integration, but over time it has developed supranational powers in fields that go from law, regulatory matters, trade, competition, monetary policy, with a common currency, but has also developed competencies in the fields of foreign and security and defense policy. And that's precisely the point where we have the issue of relations between NATO and the European Union. Of course, the relations between the European Union and the United States go very much beyond the political or defense matters. It continues to be the most important economic relationship in the world. If you consider trade and investment, this relationship, the transatlantic relationship, is still bigger than the United States-China relationship or the European Union-China relationship. Probably that's not the impression we get when we read today's newspapers, but indeed, the magnitude of the economic interest between Europe and the United States continues to be impressive. And it's also true that in the relations with Europe, the United States also consider other countries that may be small, like Ireland, but that because of the diaspora have certainly a great importance in the American society. The question about defense, more concretely, raises, of course, sometimes the concern of the compatibility of European defense with transatlantic commitment. Discussing this issue, I think it's good to start by the treaties, to see exactly what the Lisbon Treaty states about these matters. As you know, the Lisbon Treaty states in its Article 42 the following: a common security and defense policy shall be an integral part of the common foreign and security policy. It shall provide the Union with an operational capacity drawing on civilian and military assets. And more specifically about defense, the number 2 of this same article states the following: the common security and defense policy shall include the progressive framing of a common Union defense policy. This will lead to a common defense when the European Council, acting unanimously, so decides. So you see that the European Union states the progress for a common defense in a very prudent, incremental way. It states that this common security and defense policy shall include the progressive framing of a common Union defense policy, but it requires, again, unanimity to go for a common defense. But even more importantly, the same article adds the following words: the policy of the Union shall not prejudice the specific characteristics of the security and defense policy of certain member states, and shall respect the obligations of certain member states which see their common defense realized in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, under the North Atlantic Treaty, and be compatible with the common security and defense policy established within that framework. So it could not be more clear. The European Union recognizes an aspirational goal to a defense policy and to even a common defense, but it states that there should be a compatibility between this concept of European common defense with the objectives of NATO. Now, how has this relationship evolved over time? There were, and sometimes there are still some frictions. Let's be honest about it. I can share with you my experience by having participated in many meetings of NATO, not only NATO European Union meetings where I was representing the European Union as President of the Commission, for instance in the segments dedicated to Afghanistan, but also as Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Portugal. I was in many other meetings of NATO, and I remember well that sometimes the final communiqué was delayed by the discussion over the footnotes because of the different perceptions between Greece and Turkey, sometimes around the issue of Cyprus. So the relations with Turkey and Turkey with some of our members were sometimes seen what we call irritant in typical diplomatic language. By the way, today with Turkey there are issues that go beyond this. In the recent meeting I had with President Erdogan in Ankara, I discussed with him precisely some of these issues, including the controversial decision to buy missiles from Russia and the perception that sometimes exists in the diplomatic community that Turkey appears closer to Russia or to Iran than to the other European countries or to the United States of America. So I just want to underline that the issues of relations between NATO and the European Union and countries that are members of the European Union and countries that are not members of the European Union but members of NATO, in this case Turkey, are not only appearing today. That's an old story. But the reality is that also from the European Union point of view, there was sometimes some reluctance in establishing a kind of a more structured framework for cooperation. Once again, I can share with you my experience. During my time in the Commission, during the 10 years I was leading the European Commission, For instance, I promoted informally meetings, usually around a lunch, with the two Secretary Generals I've worked with, Jaap de Opscheffer and also Anders Rasmussen. And more than once, there were member states that asked my cabinet if it was really necessary that the Commission President was meeting the Secretary General in the headquarters of the European Commission or in the headquarters of NATO, by the way, both in Brussels. Today, there was progress in this area, and I'm happy to see that, probably because of many different reasons, including the aftermath of the invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea by Russia. Today, I think some of the taboos of the relationship between NATO and the European Union have been broken. But before looking at the current developments of the formal cooperation between the European Union and NATO, some words about the recent progress of the European Union in terms of security and defense. The reality is that there is progress in this area. Now we have 25 countries committed to PESCO, a permanent structured cooperation in the field of defense. As you know, the Lisbon Treaty has opened that possibility of structured cooperation for countries that want to go further in some specific area. And now 25 of our 28 member states agreed to cooperate on 34 projects that go from cybersecurity to aerospace, to a European School of Intelligence, to cooperation in the field of drones, and many other concrete areas of cooperation. There is also, for the first time, and I remember the resistance there was before to this, a dedicated European budget for investment in the defense area, including on research. There is also an interesting development to consider is how can we open PESCO projects, this structured cooperation in the field of defense projects, to countries outside the European Union that will become even more relevant when Britain, as expected, leaves the European Union, even if I think that because of its importance, not only politically, but in defense terms for us, in Europe in general, of course, the relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom in terms of defense will certainly go beyond the ones of a member of PESCO. It will require, I think, some more structured and more, let's say, ambitious framework, specific framework. That's another reason. I wanted to avoid the B word until now. I cannot. That's why we need to have a constructive solution on Brexit. Because if Brexit is done a hard way, if it leaves resentment, resentment is always bad, that will probably create difficulties for the future for the strategic relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom as a third country. And recently also we have created the European Defence Fund that now is financing 8 research projects. The European Commission has proposed for the next financial perspective for the next 7 years a budget of 30 billion euros for defense-related matters. 30 billion euros in defense is not a great deal, I know, but it's a first step, and we know in European history how important a first step is to begin a long journey. So my assessment today is that defense and security are areas where we are going to see progress in European integration. I think, in fact, some of the most important progresses are coming in this area. Partly because of a reaction to a much more aggressive Russia. Partly also because the Americans, and namely President Trump, are asking the European countries to do more in terms of defense. Partly also because there is now a much more unpredictable world with very important threats and risks. And I will not exclude that the fact that Britain is leaving is also opening an opportunity for some areas, since before United Kingdom was sometimes the reluctant partner in terms of a common defense that could be perceived by some as challenging a stronger commitment to NATO. I think now there is a point of balance that was reached where this is agreed, and in fact all the measures and the recent progress I made were accepted by the United Kingdom because they have to be accepted by unanimity. But the fact that now there is a change in the European Union, that one of the most important members of the European Union with nuclear capabilities, permanent member of the Security Council, is leaving, that leaves only one member with those attributes, it's France, that will require further progress in the areas of defense of the European Union. And also the fact that there are concerns today in the European Union regarding our external border, and to have a consistency and serious policy on the external border, I think is essential for Europe. Without being serious on the external border, we cannot continue without internal borders. And if you are committed to the European Union of free movement of people, of goods, of services, we don't need internal borders in Europe, but we need an external border. And this issue of security, sometimes there is a thin line that separates issues of security from issues of defense. So from all these reasons and some others, my assessment is that we are going to see progress in the field of the European security and defense. It will be, as always in Europe, except if there is a big accident, it will be incremental, it will be fragmented, it will be step by step, sometimes frustratingly slow, but there will be progress. And this is why we should consider, even in a more determined way, the need for a strong, loyal cooperation between the European Union and NATO. I know that some statements made by President of the United States have raised some doubts, some concerns about the commitment of the United States to NATO. The reality on the ground is, in fact, very positive. Recently, I had the occasion to discuss these issues with my very good friend Jens Stoltenberg, the current Secretary General of NATO, and other people responsible in this area. For instance, the current Minister of Germany for Defense, Ursula von der Leyen. And all the information I have is that on the ground, in terms of NATO, but also in terms of bilateral cooperation in defense, relations with America are going smoothly. And the commitment of the United States has been real. For instance, with an increased presence on the ground of military men from the United States, for instance, in Poland. So sometimes it's hard to understand the contradictions between some statements and reality, but I think we should be encouraged by these positive developments. As we are indeed delighted with the progress achieved in the joint declaration that was signed in Warsaw in 2016 by the President of the European Council, the President of the European Commission, and the Secretary General of NATO, that establishes a stable and ambitious framework for the cooperation between the European Union and NATO. I believe that precisely because of the reasons already mentioned of unpredictability, more than ever, we need a strong relationship between the European Union and NATO. I believe that precisely because of this, we need more than ever a stronger engagement of Europe with the United States of America. With the administration, certainly, but also with the Congress, with academia, with business community, with the very vibrant American society. What is at stake today in the world for all those who want to keep our open democracies and open societies safe is so crucial that we cannot make mistakes in this area. I want to conclude with some remarks about something that I believe sometimes people tend to forget. Historically, at the origins of the European Union and the European community, there was a strong support of the United States of America. After the Second World War, the Americans could bet on a divided and, let's say, very impoverished Europe. That was not their decision. Certainly also by self-interest and the need to contain the Soviet Union, but the Americans decided to support the revival of Europe through the Marshall Plan, the creation of the OECD that afterwards would become the OECD. But they also supported very clearly the European integration process. And I believe it will be critically important that the American authorities will dissipate any doubts about this commitment to the European Union and to the integration of Europe as something positive. A stable, strong European Union is good for all of us in the Atlantic Alliance. Another point is also on the European Union side, the so-called founding fathers, from Jean Monnet to Robert Schuman, Alcide de Gasperi, Konrad Adenauer, they were all very strong Atlanticists. They wanted, some of them even, they desired the United States of Europe, a federal Europe, but they were seeing that unity of Europe not against the United States, but on the contrary, as something that could complement a community, an Atlantic community. This is very important not to forget, because there is an history. There were many, many young Americans and Canadians and also from the Commonwealth countries that came here to Europe twice to protect us from totalitarianism. And these matters are extremely important when you consider also the future. But precisely because we want to avoid uncertainties, it's important to have institutions. That's why it is important that our relationships are not based only on this or that politician, but on strong, stable, consistent institutions. And I'd like to conclude with a quote of one of the founding fathers of the European community, Jean Monnet, who said in French, "Rien ne se fait sans les hommes, rien ne dure sans les institutions." Nothing is done, created without man, but nothing lasts without institutions. This is why we need strong NATO and strong European Union. Long life to NATO and long life to the European Union.